That random little circle in your Adobe Fresco is a very powerful tool. And if you're not using it, you are missing out. In this video, I'm gonna share 10 different things you can do with the modifier tool that's gonna make your life so much better. So much better. Let's get into it. If you are familiar with the modifier tool, chances are you know the first one. When you're using any brush, if you double tap the modifier or hold the modifier down, you can use that brush as an eraser. This is super helpful when you're doing anything that has some sort of gritty texture or any specific texture with that brush. If you weren't doing that, for example here, if you notice the bottom of this creative lettering, a little lumpy, not that smooth. I wanna clean that up a little bit. And if I just came in here with the eraser tool and tried to smooth this out, you'll notice it looks not great because it doesn't have the same texture as the rest of that brush. So let's undo that, come back to the brush that we were using, and now, if I double tap the modifier, turn that center part blue, look at that. We got that line all nice and clean. Another way you can use it, if you don't want to just double tap and be in erasing mode, let's say you're doing some drawing and then you just want to touch something up real quick, you could just hold it with your finger and then erase, lift, and then you're back to using the brush as normal and then touch as you need. And did you know you can move this little tool wherever you want it? I'll put mine right there. Number 2. All right, so let's say you drew this dang lettering and you filled it in yellow and you're like, dang, I didn't want it to be yellow. Well, there's a couple things you can do. The first one is when you're using the paint bucket or the paint filler tool that you use to fill it in yellow, if you double tap the modifier, when you use the paint bucket, it now erases. So it's like the opposite of fill. It sucks the color out. Pretty cool. And you can adjust your color margin the same way, just like you would with a regular paint fill, except you are removing the fill. Another way you could do this is if maybe you were gonna just select all the yellow individually. You come over to the magic wand, maybe you just tapped the inside of each of these and you're like, dang, I didn't wanna do the period, I wanted to make the period a different color. In the magic wand tool, double tap the modifier or just hold the modifier. You don't have to tappy tap. You can deselect something that you already selected. I feel like this is very handy if you're selecting a whole bunch of different things and then you accidentally select something. And you may be thinking, hey, couldn't you just undo that? Yeah, but what if I wanted to deselect the A because I wanted the A to be a different color on its own? Then the undo wouldn't work because then you have to undo back and then redo those. So you could tap the A and now just the A is deselected. Pretty cool, right? You may have heard of this next one because it's the MVP. This is vector trimming. When you're using the vector brushes, you can draw through intersecting lines and then just trim off the extra. This is really helpful in a number of situations. For example, if you're trying to just have like a really sharp corner, for example, I can come over here, go like this, and then draw like that. And doing that, I can come in here to the vector trimming mode. When you tap it, double tap it and it's blue in the center, that's just gonna work as an eraser like I showed you before. But if you tap it again and the blue goes to the outer circle, that's the trim mode. That's where you wanna be. And now I can just draw through these things and then look at that sharp point. You could cut yourself on that sharp point. Another way this can be helpful if you're trying to do some precise shapes, maybe with some circles and you're trying to cut things out. Well, let me just show you. Come down to the drawing aid at the bottom right corner, grab the circle, and let's just trace around the outside edge like that. Turn that off, and now we've got the circle, but we're trying to make like a cutout shape. Like maybe we're making a moon icon. So what we could do is go ahead and duplicate this layer, and now I'm gonna sneak another modifier tip in here. Are you ready for it? We're gonna need to move one of these circles over to the right. And as I mentioned, we want this to be precise because we're trying to cut this out. So if we, grab the transform tool and we try to move it over, you notice things are starting to like shift and wobble a little bit. And you're like, that is not ideal because I need this to be precise. Well, when you are in the transform tool and you double tap the modifier, this is gonna lock the axis of whichever way you start dragging. So this is perfect. We're getting over here. We can move it wherever we want and it's gonna not move up or down. But let's say we wanted to go vertical. If we just start dragging up, it's gonna lock that way. So it's whatever way you start dragging. So let's go back and drag this way to make our moon shape. And what we could do here is just merge these two layers together. And now we can use vector trimming to get rid of the stuff we don't want and just isolate our moon shape. We can just draw through those two lines and boom, we got our moon. Can you believe it? With the transform tool, in addition to locking the axis when you're dragging it, it'll also scale to the center point. So Let's duplicate this and I'll show you what I mean. Let's say we want to move this over here and we want to make it smaller to fit in that space. I don't know, that's what we're doing. So with the modifier selected, when we scale, you're gonna see it's gonna scale to the center. This is a handy tool because then you're not trying to scale from the bottom, then from the top to make it fit and be aligned symmetrically in the center. Pretty cool. Let me show you one more thing. So let's come back to this circle, and let's say we wanted to do some concentric circles like this. If we just took this circle and duplicated it and then transformed it using the modifier to scale it in, you'll notice it does it, but the line gets smaller because we're scaling that shape down. You might not want that to happen. If you didn't want it to happen, let me show you an alternative. Let's come back here to the circle drawing aid, and then instead of duplicating this layer, what we're gonna do is tap this transform button, and that's transforming the drawing aid tool. We can use the modifier here to scale this in from the center. We can untap that, and we can trace that, and then we could do this again, and it's gonna keep our line weight consistent because we're using the same brush, we're just transforming the size of our drawing aid tool. Would you look at that? Pretty neat. All right, so let's say you were drawing a face. You got these two eyeballs here, and they're smiling. And you're like, wait a second, those eyes don't look right. Looks like he's looking two different directions. Well, you grab the magic wand tool to select that pupil, and let's say we just want to move it a little bit. Well, you could drag it like this, but let's say you want to get really precise with that pupil placement because this is a very real drawing, it's very realistic, and when you're doing something with this much realism, you really want to sort of finesse the movements and just be very, very precise. So you may have noticed this little set of arrows down here. This allows us to move it like a pixel at a time. Tiny, tiny amounts. But if you use the modifier tool, this is gonna jump up to, I think it's like 5 or 10 pixels. So this can be pretty helpful when you're fine tuning things to get it just right. So I have this illustration here, and I did some trickery where I overlaid all of my 3 different colors to like mix and match. And anyway, for the process part of this, I had a whole bunch of different layers that I had to make before I could get to this point. And now that I have everything just on these 3 visible layers, I wanna neaten things up a little bit and group those other layers into a little folder so I have them in the future in case I need them, but I don't need to see them all the time because I'm not using them. You can see they're all turned off. You could just manually drag these on top of each other like this to make a group and then put those in there. An easier way to do this would be to double tap the modifier, and then you just tap each one of these layers individually, and then you just click on this little folder thing, and boom, they're in a little happy folder. Pretty handy. The next one is a fun one. This one is the multicolor swatch. It's not only cool to just use multicolors, you can use it as sort of a stamp or a way to like make a texture pretty easily. So for example, here, I want this dragon to have some little scales, but I don't want to draw each of them manually. So what I'm gonna do is just come over here and I'm gonna draw a scale or 2. Maybe we'll do like a little grouping of 3 like that. So what we can do is turn off our dragon layer. And now if we double tap the modifier and then hold over what we just drew as an eyedropper where it would normally select the color, when the modifier is activated, it makes a multiple color swatch. As you can see in the top right, it says multiple colors. And if you look at your color thing, you'll see we've got that stamp there. Now how this looks when we draw with it is gonna be very dependent on the brush that you are using because the brushes have different jitter effects and angles and all this stuff that's gonna change the way the shape looks. So for example here, it just looks like a mess because I'm using the classic inker, which has a lot of jitter effects to make it random. If you wanna use something like this as a stamp, you're gonna wanna go to your basic brushes and then just choose the most simple brush there is, which is the hard round brush. So with the hard round brush, if you just tap, it makes the shape a bit huge, but it makes the shape. Let's find an appropriate size for it. So I think that's a pretty good size, but I also don't want to just tap like this. And I also don't love the way they're kind of moving around a little bit. So what we can do is customize our brush settings to better match what we want it to look like. So if we come down here, we can move this spacing and you can kind of spread it out like this. And you'll see that now when we draw with it, it's making a line of them. So let's Let's see what we can do. I want it to go the other way, so we can rotate this, maybe like that, see what that looks like. It's getting closer. So we can use this top part to figure out how it's looking and adjust what we want to do. So if we bring the spacing a little bit tighter, we can get them to overlap a little bit. So then once you have the settings dialed in to what you want the pattern to do, you can just kind of come in here and easily add in some texture. Look at that. That's a lot faster than drawing these all manually. Let's see what else we can do with the multicolor swatch. Another fun thing you can do is make sort of like a range of colors. Just draw some stripes. Maybe we'll just make it get a little bit darker at the bottom, and then maybe we'll get it a little bit lighter at the top. And we could do it like this, or maybe we could smooth it out and make it more of a gradation. An easy way to do that would be using the smudge brush. Then we could just kind of come in here and blend this together a little bit, which I think is looking pretty good, but I think I want to make it a little bit more dramatic in tone. So I'm just gonna get like a little bit of a darker color at the bottom, like this, and then we'll blend that in with the smudge tool. And I think just doing that is gonna give us a pretty cool effect. What we could also try is to duplicate this and then flip it over like this so we have more of like a range. So let's zoom out, use the touch modifier, and then just zoom until we get as much as we're trying to get. Now if we draw with this, we make it a little bit bigger so it's clear, you'll see we get this kind of crazy effect. Now this looks specific to the classic inker, as I mentioned before, because it's got all this variation in it. Now let's see what it looks like with a more simple brush. So just that simple, quick gradient that didn't even look that good gives us this really nice, smooth, this looks delicious, I have to say. Look at that. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do. You can experiment and really see how this stuff works together. For example, let's make like a shape that's not completely flat. Like let's see what that does. So we'll come over here, grab some other colors. What if we just make like a star X pattern type situation, like that. Let's see what that does. What? Look at that. Look how crazy that is. And you can just experiment with like the different brushes and see what they do, because there's no telling. Look at that. Look at the stuff that you can make. This is Fruity Pebbles if you leave them in the bowl all day and then you come back and you're like, whoops, forgot about those Fruity Pebbles. That's what you're left with. Another way you could use this is to make a line out of something that I wanted to make a rope. So I drew this little piece of a rope right there, and we're gonna turn this into a rope line. So I'll zoom in here, get this. I think that's probably pretty good. And now if we grab this hard round brush, so let's come down here to shape dynamics and then change the angle control to direction. And this should make it follow our direction. The problem now is that it's just, the wrong angle. So we can go ahead and fix that by just changing this angle until it lines up like that. And then here we can start drawing. And look at this. Look at this handy rope. Look at this rope that we made. We have infinite rope. What if we want to do some rope lettering? What if we wanted to be like, make it say rope? Ropey type, rope-a-dope. As a professional illustrator, I do nearly all of my work in Adobe Fresco, which means I spend an awful lot of time drawing in Adobe Fresco. And as a result, I got lots of tips and tricks. So if you want to know more about all the different things you can do with Adobe Fresco, I got videos for you. We got a whole playlist here. I don't know if I can link to a playlist right here, but I'm gonna try. And if I can't, I'm gonna have one below. If not, I'm gonna just have another video that I think is gonna help you on your road to the mastery of the Fresco universe. I think this has been a good talk. You can let me know below. If you've got some other modifier hacks that you really like, well, tell us about them. Share the modifier tips, because I don't know. I feel like Adobe's not talking about them.